I'm Sherwood McCaskey, welcoming you to...
Today is a funny night.
Thanks for your time. It is generally accepted that throughout history, the central role of women in society has ensured the stability, progress, and long-term development of nations. There has always been speculations about the role played by women in the 1937 revolt in Barbados. In this week's program, our historians will call attention to that role. We begin with Dr. Tara Ennis, who first of all will focus on the situation that propelled women to rise up and to take a stance.
There's no social provisioning after emancipation. There's no such thing as really an orphanage or places that young children who are abandoned or their mothers die that they can go to. There's really no place where disabled persons can find refuge. There's certainly no education possibilities for those persons. The elderly are also quite vulnerable in this period because really all of the money and all of the effort was being directed to the building up of Barbadian infrastructure, roads, railways, telecommunications. There wasn't a lot of money that was being spent or directed to things like healthcare, sanitation. Certainly there was a recognition by the late 19th century that more money needed to be spent on education. But when you look at the breakdown of where that money is being spent on education, it's mostly being spent on educating the most elite Barbadians in the island, and particularly men.
So what we're seeing in terms of social welfare in Barbados is a very limited system. Unfortunately, it was not the type of system that brought dignity to the lives of our people.
It's a system that is based on what we call poor relief, and poor relief is something that you can access through the vestry system. So you had to be member of a parish and you'd go to, you'd basically ask for some assistance, and it was the most stigmatized aid. So if you had to go get that kind of aid, it really meant that you were quite desperate. And it also meant that the persons who were distributing that aid could make judgments about your lifestyle, who you lived with, so a lot of judgments around the same kind of family structures that we just spoke about, the ideas of respectability. So if you were supposed to be a productive male and able-bodied, you certainly weren't going to be the first pick to get that assistance through the vestry. It was really for persons who were quite vulnerable, so elderly persons and disabled. And sometimes if you were a widow with children, okay, so a widow and children could get that aid, but if you weren't married and your husband died, that doesn't necessarily mean that you were able to get access to that kind of aid as well. So it's quite stigmatized, and it's quite, it's around the idea that should we make a judgment on whether you should have access to this aid.
Today, if we are feeling unwell, we could visit one of our polyclinics. In fact, there is at least one that is open 24 hours a day. But back then in the 1930s, that was not the case. In fact, what we are seeing is a picture of limited investment in terms of health care. Being treated in any one of our institutions was very much dependent on who knew you.
So certainly by the early 20th century, we have a general hospital that came into being in the 1840s in Barbados. So that is the area, that's that building in Gemmett's Lane. Some of your viewers will be aware that it burnt down, I think, last year. But that is the location of the general hospital, and that was in an urban center. So that means if you were sick and your plantation, the person that you worked for, subscribed to that hospital, it was kind of like public relief, but not quite. You had to know somebody to get care there. And that is primarily where there was centralized health care. Then you had each vestry may have had in the early 20th century like a small hospital or a Lion hospital, or what we know as almshouses, and these eventually become the kind of district hospitals later on in the 20th century. But these are areas, again, that you access through stigmatized aid. You only go there because you have no other family member who's looking after you. If you end up there, that means that you really are in desperate need of healthcare. Healthcare in the early 20th century is not like today, where you go to a polyclinic and you don't have to pay a fee to attend. Healthcare in the early 20th century is really driven by a private system that's quite expensive, and most Barbadians would not have been able to access it.
It is natural for a woman to take the initiative in preserving child health and good nutrition. We're getting a sense of the plight of the woman back in Barbados in the 1930s, and we're beginning to understand the pressures and why the woman would have seen it as her place to assume an active role in this revolt.
The absence of public health and sanitation, very few educational opportunities for women, so women are kind of locked into accepting very low wages, and low wages that are even lower than what is paid to working men. Women have been struggling with this, and that was part of their frustration. They were struggling also with family size as well. So they'd have no control over how many children they have, the birth spacing. You know, what we know is the Barbados Family Planning Association and access to birth control is something that really only comes into being in 1959. So that pressure on women to sometimes be the sole provider for their children prompted a number of women to participate in the rebellion. They realized that the rebellion was part and parcel of their own concerns.
The women recognized that. Women recognized and were cognizant of the fact that many of their children, their offspring, died before their first birthday. In the 1930s, we had an infant mortality rate over 200 per thousand. And of course, women, being so close to these children, understood that. So you could understand, therefore, why women would want to participate in this rebellion. Now, women were important in the social aspects of Barbados. Women were the ones who recognized children were hungry and did not have food during the day, or did not have supper at night. The women recognized that. Women recognized and were cognizant of the fact that many of their children, their offspring, died before their first birthday.
Now, this brings us to another aspect of health, sanitation. Today, there are a number of trucks from the Sanitation Service Authority that traverse the island and collect our garbage. There's also piped water in our homes and other establishments. This was not the case in the 1930s.
So sanitation and kind of what we think about as public health today is something that was non-existent in Barbados in the early 20th century. Most people did not have access to clean water. If you wanted access to clean water, you would have to go to a pond, a nearby pond or a well, where everybody used those resources, humans and animals, and they became like quickly contaminated with runoff, surface runoff, fertilizers, feces, all kinds of very dangerous pathogens. And typhoid fever, for example, was endemic in Barbados in the early 20th century, carrying away many, many individuals, and particularly children. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, if you're a working class mother having to go out to work every day and you have to feed your children, what you're going to be doing is mixing whatever kind of infant feeds that exist. If you had access to milk, usually it's like tin milk or condensed milk or some other bush tea, for example, and you're giving that as a form of sustenance to your children, you're mixing that with contaminated water resources. In terms of sanitation, there's hardly any home has waterborne toilet facilities. So all of your night soil is being buried in the yard or being contained in the home or thrown on a beach. What we think about where we put our garbage and our waste today was, as I said, non-existent in the early 20th century. In terms of your garbage, so the refuse that you created as a household, most of that, if it could be reused, was reused. So if you had tins, for example, you did your shopping and you had some tin good, that tin would become your baking tin. So interestingly, the absence of everyday curbside collection actually created a sense of ingenuity amongst Barbadians, so that they tried to reuse where necessary. But where you had materials that could not be disposed of, could not be recycled, those often ended up in a community dump. And I don't say that to mean that it's a community organized dump. These are informal dumps in communities. So it's not being sent to a landfill. Your garbage that you're creating is ending up very close to your home, where your children walk by to school, even where your children play. So again, very dangerous concepts of kind of public health in this early period.
In the 1930s, we had an infant mortality rate over 200 per thousand.
So anywhere from, in any given year, from 300 deaths per live births for children under the age of 5. If you look at the Westbury Cemetery records, year after year, you know, a good 40% of the deaths in every given year are children who are not necessarily getting access to proper nutrition. And certainly because of the poor sanitary conditions and poor access to water, for example, they are at the front line of this kind of desperation that women are trying to seek redress for.
And of course, women, being so close to these children, understood that. So you could understand, therefore, why women would want to participate in this rebellion.
So that when the rebellion really starts to take off, women do come out, they participate.
As a matter of fact, when Clement Payne held a march in July to the Government House, a woman by the name of Iris Joseph accompanied Payne on that march. She was said to be a St. Lucian woman who lived in Golden Square.
She was living so close to Golden Square, as a number of other women would have heard what Clement Payne was trying to say and what he was trying to agitate for.
Some people said she was Payne's girlfriend. She said when she went to court, because she was arrested, that she cooked for Clement Payne, okay? And that is all we know about that relationship between Clement Payne and Iris Joseph. But Iris Joseph participated on that march with Clement Payne, that march where Payne was arrested.
In the morning, 5 officers were sent to bring him before the city magistrate. The date for a rush trial was set, accusing him of making false claims that Barbados was his birthplace.
I refused his plea, sent him to defend himself. He couldn't pay, so why expose myself? He lost, filed an appeal, then headed to Golden Square, where he denounced his conviction to a crowd of thousands. He was their great Messiah, crucified.
Next day, a Friday, throbbing with heat, Clement and 300 marched down to Government House, singing hymns
Before the house, my other self alone advanced towards the gate, sentried by armed police.
Stop! For your life's sake, don't make another step.
I had to do something. Clement was of my blood.
You'll come around. After all, you are one of us.
When you
Our
face
people,
racism,
we are really yours.
you turn towards us.
After all,
Our people, one of us. You're one of us. You're one of us. You're one of us. You're one of us.
Women were also there when Payne's trial came up. Grantley Adams testified to the Dean Commission that he heard the women saying that if they do anything to Payne, they're going to do the same thing as was done in Trinidad. In other words, the Trinidadians rioted and that they were going to riot as well. So the women are verbalizing these things. The women are saying, look, we are going to riot if you trouble Clement Payne.
So, I defended him in appeal and won. Now, Clement's triumph brought out thousands to the court, jubilant to see him home. Too late. They had secretly slipped him through a gate. Actions you would think the verdict would disbar. Then detectives stuffed him in a car and whisked him away. Crowds lined Pierhead waterfront, hoping to find and even rescue their leader. Deception's breath poisoned the air. Clement was put on a vessel at Pierhead. Police had hustled him through Carlisle Bay.
So they troubled Clement Payne, they deported Clement Payne, and you could understand the women kept their word and participated in the 1937 revolt.
Now, Payne is gone. The masses are angry. They have made their way from Golden Square. They have entered Lower Bay Street and are about to cross the bridge. As Dr. David Brown told us in last week's program, all hell is about to break loose in Barbados.
We're here on the Chamberlain Bridge in Bridgetown. This bridge was a very important feature in the naming of Bridgetown. When the English came here in 1627, they found in this area a wooden bridge connecting these two parts, and they started calling that bridge Indian Bridge, and the city Indian Bridgetown. Now, afterwards, when the English settled in and colonized the area, they dropped the Indian Bridge and they simply called it Bridgetown. But let us fast forward to 1937, July 26. This bridge plays another important role in what we call the 1937 riots, or what I prefer to call the 1937 revolt. That revolt had its epicenter in a place called Golden Square, not too far from this site. Golden Square was a dilapidated residential area where Clement Payne had most of his 17 meetings. As you know, Clement Payne came to Barbados in March 1937, and it was Payne who met the crowds, who talked to people, and had many meetings in Barbados. Some meetings were held at the Lower Green, some were held in Westbury Road, but the majority of the meetings were held in the Golden Square. So that in July 1937, 26th of July, when the riot started, or the revolt started, it started right there in Golden Square after a political meeting held by Payne lieutenants. That meeting ended at about just after 10 o'clock in the night, and riots erupted around 10 p.m. July 26, 1937. They smashed the door of the Empire Theatre. The Empire Theatre was the first area that was attacked. Empire Theatre. Crowds were in there watching a movie, and they had to scamper because of this large crowd, over 200 people rioting at that point. The rioters left Empire Theatre and they went through Wellington Street and Nelson Street, River Road and Gemmonts Lane, and they clashed with the police during that period. So that for 3 hours, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning, the rioters were clashing with the police. During that time, several homes in Golden Square were attacked. Some homes were smashed by stones. Some homes lost their palings because of the scuffle, because of the attacks being launched. Now, during that skirmish, that initial skirmish, the crowd figured that a child who was the daughter of one of Payne's friends was killed.
A woman named Iris Joseph was quite close to Clement Payne, even rumored to be, if not an associate, a very close confidant, maybe even a partner of Clement Payne. But the child who's rumored to be struck that precipitated the rebellion is supposed to be her child.
There was a feeling that this child was killed having been hit by one of the stones that was being fired.
The rumor went around that somebody, police threw a stone, hit or killed a woman he had, a child of a woman he had.
And they blamed the police. They blamed the police for this misfortune. They blamed the police for this death. The evidence shows, however, that the child did not die, but the rioters felt that the child was killed.
And so the women of Barbados found their place in the 1937 riots. Those maternal instincts came to the fore, and like the true mother and nurturer of the family, these women in their own style join in the fight to make Barbados a better place. Agitate, but do not violate. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time. This has been
Today is a funny night.